Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 2023 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. Our guest this evening is TAF member Sarah Ryan, who is going to be talking about writing about mental illness. Sarah, thank you for joining us this evening.
Definitely.
I wanted to start our conversation, Sarah, by asking you to kind of take us through with the beginnings of your mental health issues. When did this all start to manifest in your life and become something that you had to deal with?
Well, it was kind of an insidious thing. My thinking changed in sophomore year of college. I was clear, present-minded, rational, didn't really think about anything except what was in front of me. But then by junior year, I was, I was very analytical. I would have theories. I would be thinking, and I would retreat into my mind sometimes instead of being fully present. And this led to a number of issues. I did graduate from college, but I also had um, I was overprescribed Adderall and had an Adderall intoxication, and I could have died. And that, but that and the fact that I already wasn't doing well kind of exacerbated what happened to me. And now research shows that Adderall intoxications can cause schizophrenia. Um, so, but I went through about 10 years where I was misunderstood. I was a good person, but I was mentally ill. And it was so frustrating because I had been a straight A student, uh, uh, volunteer at church. I did missions overseas. I considered myself a good person, but my life just wasn't working out professionally, socially. It was very hard for me because I had always been like a person who never got in trouble, who did well, and you know, very serious. Um, so that was hard. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I had 3 psychotic breaks in 2 years. And those were horrifying. They were awful. And it wasn't until after I had been taking an antipsychotic almost during this whole time, except for when I had the psychotic breaks and I learned my lesson that I did need the antipsychotic. Um, so, but it wasn't until after the third psychotic break when I was 33 um, that antipsychotics truly started making a difference for me. And I don't understand why, what changed, but um, I was able to stabilize and develop a clear mind. And so even though I thought I had missed the bus or missed the boat, um, there's something I learned that there's always another boat coming. And my life was able to turn around where um, I land. I managed to get a master's degree, and once my head was clear, I was able to land a career position, um, be in a serious relationship where I did reveal my diagnosis, and my husband, then boyfriend, was okay with it. But that was a very difficult process that I write about in one of my blogs. Um, and then, so I had the career, I had the boyfriend, I had a lot of momentum and confidence and hope going. And then I got pregnant, then I gave birth to our son. And, I continued my small business where I started to build it. And, I got involved with tennis. So I have a sport now again. And I have many friendships, like my whole life turned around. And in ways it was so awful at times that you know my journey, I really feel like it's a deliverance of some sort into just a whole new life where i can't even I can't even fathom just how hard it was for me before, and maybe my brain just doesn't let me go back there.
How did your schizophrenia affect your family and your friends?
you know I think it was hard because we really resisted that diagnosis. There's a especially with people you love, it's like, no, it can't be schizophrenia. Or because we just considered that the worst thing it could possibly be. And so when I was diagnosed with that, I thought my life was over. I thought I was condemned. I might as well be dead, and, um, for me, I think it was hard on my parents, because a lot of times, I pushed them away or felt alienated from them. And I think it was hard on all of us. Obviously, it was hardest on me, but I think it's hard on parents when you can't reason with someone who is that mentally ill. Like you can tell them, I don't think you should go to that PhD program, or you're safe home with us. You don't have to go to a homeless shelter. But until, you know, but when someone has lost insight in mental illness, you can't really explain things to them. You can't really rationalize. And so I took this journey, but finally found my way home to my parents.
When did you start to think about writing about your journey and your experiences, and why was it important that you do that? Did you find the act of writing about this kind of therapeutic or cathartic?
Well, there's a lot of things there. I was always good at writing papers and art. So when I went to college, I chose a journalism major in the visual communication sequence at UNC. But even though I went to journalism school, I didn't have a passion of what to write about. I didn't know what my passion was to write about. And then I went to I started writing poetry in my early 20s, and for me, that this was a very difficult time of my life. And sonnets were a proof to me that I still had a soul. Like if I could write poetry, I was okay and basically still intact on the inside. It was really, really important to me. Um, and then in graduate school, I did research, social science research and stuff. Um, and then in my first career position, I did writing and graphic design again at a national nonprofit. And then I started my own business with writing and graphic design. But I mean, this is kind of an aside, but I started doing third party blogging, and that's where I first started writing blogs. When I learn a new topic, I write about it, and I throw in a shameless plug about the product at the end of it. But that's where I got familiar with the blog format, and I think honestly, it took me having distance from all the pain and suffering I went through before I could go back and write about. I felt strong and accepted and loved in my relationships, and I'd come to terms with acceptance that or embracing that yes, this happened to me and I'm not ashamed. And in fact, I want to help other people. I write the blogs that I would have done anything to have read when I was going through what I went through, because it does feel like being a human anomaly. Because it felt like I was the only one in the world ever diagnosed with schizophrenia because no one talks about it. It took me 12 years until I joined a NAMI support group that I now co-facilitate, to ever meet anybody else with my diagnosis, because no one talks about it. And so, I want to write about the topics and blogs that no one talks about. I think a lot of people, in fact, I read a stat recently from the World Health Organization that a third of people with schizophrenia fully recover. But I think often be painful to go back and write about those things. You want to run and not look back, but I like I, the intention of my blogs is just from the heart. I am writing from the gut, from the heart, about topics that I think can help other people like me. And I started writing um, I started writing for Namiwake County, and I didn't even know my style or what I was supposed to be writing, but I started finding my groove, and I just started, instead of trying to cite research or cite things to prove that what I said was real, I just started writing from the heart, and it seemed to be really liked. And I was like, well, let me submit this to the National NAMI blog. And I really got on a roll with them. And if by the end of 2023, I'll have 8 blogs published with them. And um, that gave me the attention or the platform to apply for psychology today. But I'm very careful because it could be easy to get caught up in other things when writing, especially now that royalties may come into play, or looking at what other people are writing on psychology today and comparing it to mine and having that imposter syndrome or whatever. But I think that in order to be successful moving forward on psychology today and other platforms, I
Yeah.
just have to write from the heart about what really matters, where my intention of other people, because that has been my formula for success.
How
Yeah.
difficult was it for you, Sarah, the very first time you started to put yourself out there as a voice for schizophrenia? You know, when you really, the very first time, was it hard for you, or was it kind of a relief, maybe?
Well, I think that over the past 12 years since my last psychotic break, I've carefully cultivated this identity because a lot of what happened to me, people, my peers didn't know about. It was discreet, going to the psych ward, and, maybe my closest friends knew, but it was all under wraps. So I was so careful because I just wanted to be normal like everyone else. I just wanted to have a normal life like everyone else, and I wanted everyone to think I was normal. Um, but um, what I realize is that I have a valuable experience to share, and what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
Was just wondering if you found the act that very, as you started to get into it, if you found it rather kind of, if it was kind of a frightening experience, or was it more of a cathartic and a relief for you to be able to vocalize what you had been through?
I think the act of deciding to put my real name on my blogs was a huge step for me. But I think on one level, it's completely internal and doesn't really relate to what other people think of me. Like, I think the biggest step on Psychology Today, I have a very generic name, Sarah Ryan. So it was like throwing a message in the bottle to NAMI.org, like, oh, no one will know who I am anyway, because there's thousands of Sarah Ryans out there. Um, but putting my picture and my bio next to my name, that's when it's real. That's when I'm actually um, exposing myself. It feels like coming out of the closet, to be honest, like at an earlier time in history. Um, but and because my picture is on Psychology Today, I was like, well, now I'm out. I might as well create a writer's website, with my picture and my work, because I'm proud of it. So I think Psychology Today gave me that platform. So, well, if they accept me and this is a reputable outlet, then I'm proud of that, and I want people to see what I'm writing,
Well,
and in ways it feels cathartic because I did it, and I've had this battle about whether I let anybody know for so long. So that is kind of a relief, but I don't know yet the effects of creating this website because I only created it a week ago. I don't know if someone's going to say something to me. And recently on my social media on Facebook is where everyone I know is. And and part of this process was posting a picture of me at NAMI Walks, this big fundraiser for NAMI in North Carolina. And I said I do this to embrace my own journey with mental illness. And that was the biggest step. It's one thing to have a website out there. It's one thing to have a profile that people may or may never see on Psychology Today. But posting it to Facebook with all my former employers, everyone I've ever known, was the biggest step of all. And, one thing that when I've talked with an agent, because I'm writing a book, but like she says that, if I go hybrid or traditional publishing, my book and everything about it is going to be on my LinkedIn and Facebook. And I feel like that's really the final challenge where everything will be put to the test. Will people reject me? Will people not understand? Or will people identify or relate that, I've had my own struggles, and I don't really know yet. And so I think the verdict's really out once I really start posting about my story to social media, but I don't think I'm ready to do that yet.
for those who may be unaware, tell us what NAMI is.
NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I credit this organization with really giving me my roots to grow. I did not use NAMI when I was really struggling, but I felt this compelling urge to become a co-facilitator for their connection support group, which is people who are severely mentally ill. And I co-facilitate a weekly support group with them. And I have really enjoyed that. It really means a lot to me, and I really have developed a lot of nice connections there. I also did all the graphic design for NAMI Walks North Carolina this year as a volunteer thing. Um, I I also, what else do I do? Oh yeah, I'm also a trained public speaker for NAMI. So I had my first speaking engagement at NC State in the spring. But I feel like a lot of people at NAMI are like-minded people, and at there, my story is celebrated and interesting. It's not something I have to hide. It's like the last words you'll ever hear on my lips is schizophrenia in front of almost so many people. But when I was telling someone there that I was volunteering with, um, I was like, normally I would be like, stop, stop, what are you doing? You can't say the schizophrenia word. You can't tell this person what really happened to you. But I went ahead and did, like, and this is NAMI. I can say this here, and there's no, if there's anywhere in the world where there's no stigma about what I went through, it's with NAMI.
What you've written a number of posts for NAMI, and now you're going to be writing for Psychology Today. What kind of a response have you received from the posts that you've put out so far, for NAMI especially? I know you haven't had anything published on Psychology Today yet. Is that correct?
Not yet. I'm
Yeah.
still getting my account set up. But I think with NAMI, one of the reasons I was looking for another publication, I'm honored that I was published so many times with NAMI, but you can't search for my name and see what I've written. There's no commenting feature on the articles. So I can't really know what people think. All I know, because I'm gathering data for my nonfiction book proposal, is that my blogs have been viewed about 15,000 times. And that means a lot to me. Like, my goal when I started writing these blogs is I just want to help one person's life be better than mine. That's all I care about. So the fact that 15,000 people have read these blogs um, really means a lot to me. Um, but yeah.
How has this all what has this entire experience meant for you? What have you gotten out of this personally in telling your story? How has this influenced your personal life?
Well, you know, I wouldn't, I would be dishonest to say that this for other people. It's been for me too. Um, I feel like I feel like a critical component that's missing from national discourse and discussion is the emotional recovery from psychosis. It is absolutely terrifying. It is your worst nightmare, but you're awake and you face all the repercussions of anything you did in your dream. And I think I think that's really rough. But I feel like a lot of this has to do with sense making. How do I bring everything together in these blogs, and it all happens simultaneously as I'm writing these blogs. I don't have it all figured out and then I write it in a blog. As I'm writing, it just all starts to come together in something that has meaning or that could benefit someone else. And honestly, when I was in my darkest days, when I didn't care whether I lived or died and I thought I might as well be dead, there's no way that my life can ever recover from what happened, it's hopeless. I prayed that all my suffering would not be in vain, that it would not be wasted, that there could be a meaning behind what I was going through that gave my life purpose. And I prayed this. I went through this litany every morning of all this negativity, but I would pray um that everything would come together in a positive way, that everything I went through didn't just randomly happen to me for no good reason. And and so I feel like through, first having a voice through NAMI and then branching out and starting these blogs, um, I feel like my life is coming full circle. And because it's coming full circle, where I'm finding meaning in trying to help others, I'm coming closer to an acceptance that I had to go through all this.
What would you what would you like people to know about people who have mental illness? What do you think people outside of that don't really get about people who are afflicted like that?
I would would say about 95% of us are not violent. And I would say 95% of us are much more likely to face violence from somebody else because we're in a very vulnerable state. There's no reason to be afraid. People with mental illnesses are no more likely to be violent than other people, and often we're victims. I think when people hear the word schizophrenia, they think fear. They think multiple personality disorder. They think violence. They think unpredictability, or just something. And I think a lot of it comes from the fear of the unknown. I think when science can't yet explain something like voices or hallucinations and psychotic breaks, people attribute it to something spiritual or personal. And I think it's hard because at this current time, we still separate the head from the rest of the body. We still think, oh, your mind, it's who you are. And so if you have a mental illness, it's a reflection on you as a person, or it's a reflection on your character or how strong of a person you are. Or if you're depressed, why can't you just snap out of it? Because it's a willpower thing, because this is your mind, it's who you are, it can't be touched by anything else. But the truth is, your brain is an organ, just like any other organ in your body. And one thing really interesting that my psychiatrist said, I've been seeing the same psychiatrist for about 12 years, but he said years ago, he said, when it comes to the brain, we're all still in elementary school. We are only beginning to understand um, how all these things happen. And, one of my reasons, like, I needed reasons to live after what I went through. And one of the things I live for, not just to see my son grow up, um, my other dream is that I live long enough to see a scientific explanation for what I went through, and that it's all going to be medicalized instead of spiritualized, where it's some kind of character flaw or weakness that caused.
Sarah, who were your heroes? Who are your inspirations?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I admire a lot of women in history who have not been scared to do what's right, even in spite of popular opinion. Like, I'm actually related to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a leader of women's suffrage. And she faced a lot of adversity to do what was right. And history, she was on the right side of history. I think I admire people like that who do what's right only to be confirmed later, long after their lives are over, that yes, they were right, of course. And I admire that, because it is kind of concerning to talk about mental illness, because I'm a mother. What if someone questions whether I can be a good mother? And that has happened before to me, when I shared my diagnosis. So I feel like I'm laying a lot of things bare because I'm tired of hiding from about this. I feel like I'm my own hero. I'm an unsung hero who went through this terrible ordeal and came out of the other side. And there's a part of me, it bothers me that I'm just going to keep quiet about this because I care more about what other people might think of me than telling a story that needs to be told for the benefit of others.
Sarah, how old is your son?
He's 3, he'll be 4 in July.
Okay, I was going to ask, if he was older, I was going to ask how your situation has affected him, or if he was aware of what you had gone through, many, many years before. But obviously, he's just a toddler. So
Yeah,
I'm assuming that you haven't talked to him about this.
well, the conversation has already started. When I pull up to the pharmacy to pick up my medicines, he says, "Mommy, what's wrong? Why you take medicine?" And I say, "It helps me feel better." And that's all he needs to know now. But, maybe by the time he's in elementary school, upper elementary school, I'll say, "I take this medicine to help me think clearly." And then when he's older, you know, tell him the schizophrenia word, you know. But so far, everything's been pretty natural and gradual. And, I wrote this blog that is yet to be published. It's published on NAMI Wake County, but it's going to be published by the National NAMI in August or September. But it's the meaning of parenthood after hernia diagnosis. Um, and it talks about the questions like, there's been no isolated for schizophrenia. Um, but long before I decided to have a child, I had to decide my life was worth living when all was said and done before I could have a child. And I did. And, there were so many environmental factors that exacerbated my disease that I don't think are going to happen for Liam, and um, so already early in childhood, there it's just a much better situation for him.
Of the various posts that you've written so far for NAMI, what was the most difficult for you to write and why?
Um, I would say this one that I haven't published yet anywhere, and I think it's going to be my first blog post for Psychology Today. Um, it's on transitioning back to a clear mind. Um, it was not like, oh, I take antipsychotics. I don't think about irrelevant things anymore. Everything's good. It was not like that. It was a very gradual transition. A few people have asked me, well, what was the turning point? When did you know things were going to change in your life? And the thing is, it was such a gradual process where um, there was no assurance I would ever get better. I just had to get up every day and keep trying, keep going to therapy, keep taking my medicine, keep hoping, keep praying, just putting one foot in front of the other, never giving up hope. And it eventually happened. But I find it hard to describe this transition to a clear mind. I talk about fear and loss. Like, it's scary to stop thinking and be fully engaged in the present when you've been retreated into your own thoughts for over a decade. That was very scary. And um, also, um, being fully part of the present day life that everybody else is in, even when it's a little boring compared to what you were thinking about. Um, and so I'm really tossing and turning with this blog because I want it to be a great one for my first blog with Psychology Today. And so I keep looking at it, but I'm not sure if it's right or not. And I think I'm too close to it. I think I need to for a week and then come back.
How frequently will you be posting for Psychology Today?
At least once per month. I mapped out 12 blog concepts because I wanted to be ready. If they're expecting blogs, I want to have them ready. Um, but I want to blog at least once a month. It would be ideal to do two, but honestly, I'm kind of scared I'll run out of content because I just keep writing. I don't have a plan on how to space writing out so I have enough content. I just put it all down there. And one day I'm going to run out of things to say. It just hasn't happened yet.
Sarah, thank you so much for being so open about your experiences and talking with us about this today. We're all just incredibly happy that your life has turned out well in the end. And I personally am just ecstatic that you joined TAF. You bring so much to this organization, and I just wanted to say thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Sarah right now? Mark?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Sarah, when you said that there were 15,000 people who had looked at your blog, and I thought, well, maybe there are 15,000 now that don't feel so alone like you did. Because I think, well, I've been diagnosed with OCD, ADD, and major clinical depression, and I tried to keep all that under wraps for years. And finally, I thought, wait a minute, maybe I can help somebody by telling my story. It's certainly, not in the same category as yours, but so I go on forums online now, and people will ask me questions about depression and so on, and I answer them and I point them toward where they're supposed, where they can go to get help. But my question was, do you feel that the stigma surrounding mental illness has gotten better in the past few years?
I think there's still a lot of fear. I think it's less culturally acceptable to joke about mental illness. I think there's a cultural awareness and sensitivity about labels and being okay in the workplace with a disability. I think there are important steps taking place, but there are people that have told me when I've disclosed to them that I have schizophrenia, they're like, "Don't tell anybody else," and I agree with you that um, it took so much energy to hide diagnosis, whether I realized it or not, or to
Mhm.
conceal who I was and not, because this part of my life is an intrinsic part of myself. I can't just pretend like it never happened and pretend to everybody else it didn't happen, because that really wouldn't be fair to me or to others.
Well, it takes a
My
lot
fault.
of courage to do what you're doing, and I really appreciate it, and I know a lot of other people that are reading your blogs do too.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that.
My dad had very serious depression when I was just a little kid. And I remember that he was hospitalized twice for it and even received electroconvulsive therapy at one point. So I was really too young at that time to understand exactly what was going on. It was only later that I found out what had happened to him and all of that. And it was very eye opening. But my mother did a great job of protecting my sister and I, just from what was going on at that moment in my family's life. So, I have that point. Hannah, did you have a question for Sarah?
I did. I'm curious about in the beginning, what happened to you where you realized that you could accept help or realize you needed to get help?
Um, the good thing is I've always been coachable. I've always been open for help. Like starting when I was 19, I was going to counseling. I've actually been in counseling over 20 years. Um, I've that is one blessing for me, is that I was willing to take medicine. I was willing to go to weekly counseling, and I'm still in weekly counseling. Um, I'm I guess I'm coachable. I guess that's the best thing I can describe. I was always willing to work on myself. I was never in denial that I need to grow and change. I think the scary part when I was in college is all this happened so gradually that I couldn't realize my thinking had changed. I didn't have that insight to realize that my thinking was no longer clear. Um, and so it was tough because over those next 10 years, when I had gone from an overachiever to an underachiever, I blamed it on myself and I
Mm.
internalized what's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. What's wrong with me? I'm so misunderstood. And and I and I couldn't put my finger on it as mental illness, even though I was in
Mm.
counseling.
Mhm. That makes sense to me.
Sarah, what's the goal of your therapy now?
Well, I'm in EMDR, which is eye movement reprocessing desensitization. It involves hypnosis, and it's really focusing on trauma. Uh, I, through my psychotic breaks and some other traumatic events that happened during this time period, um, I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD. Um, and so, I'm kind of rewriting some narratives and some networking in my brain, hardwiring in my brain, to really move myself more into the present, where um, I I can leave the past behind, and I think it's been very helpful.
Does anyone else have questions for Sarah? Just raise your hand if you do, and I'll call on you. Mike?
Hi. First of all, Sarah, like Mark and everybody else has said, I absolutely admire you for, coming out and talking about this because, depression runs in my family, and to your point, it's not easy. But I guess my question is, when you're in kind of a moment when you're feeling a lot of stuff caving in on you, and you're feeling, that a breakdown comes, what kind of things can someone do maybe to, if I can kind of use the term, like relax themselves, or, you know, or deal with it?
Well, I think, this hasn't happened to me in a long time, but earlier in my recovery, maybe, my last psychotic break was when I was 33, and this is right, probably around 35, 37. I would know if I started to feel unstable. And I had the insight to know that I needed to drive home, lay on my couch, and just breathe and relax. And I knew being in the safety of my home was better than being somewhere if all of a sudden psychosis. There were some very stressful events, like one when I was 33, and that I would be in a store and I wouldn't know where I was headed or where I was walking. So then I was like, I need to go home. I need to lay down. I need to call somebody. When I was pregnant, the risk of postpartum psychosis is greater for me because I've had psychosis before. And I installed an app on my phone called Not Okay. And I contacted a few of my closest friends and said, if I press this button, that means I'm in trouble and you're going to be notified. And just the process of collecting those friends who I could trust information. Now, I never needed to use the Not Okay app, thank goodness. But being prepared like that and being aware in advance, it's almost like if you're prepared and aware in advance, nothing's going to happen. But I've had very few cases in the past several years where, probably none that I can think of, where I thought I was in trouble. But there was a time when I was 33 and 35 where I thought I might be headed towards instability again.
Sue?
Yeah, I just really wanted to thank you. My brother just passed.
Oh,
He was schizophrenic.
okay.
He passed in January. He I can see you're a much more personal person. He had difficulty socializing. He always seemed to have a woman in his life, but it was very hard for him to interact with people. One of the things that overwhelmed me was he encountered, you were talking about how the schizophrenic is often more in danger, and we went through a lot of that, particularly with the police. And I think if there was a better understanding of mental illness and more Not Okay apps for people, he had bones broken and incarcerated for, I guess it's considered antisocial behavior, but it was just his difficulty in dealing with people. So I know what you're doing is scary, but we appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, Sue. And, every case of schizophrenia is different. It's actually an umbrella term that just encapsulates a lot of different symptoms. There's no straight case of schizophrenia. It's all on a spectrum with schizoaffective and bipolar. It's all a continuum. But I will say I feel fortunate in many ways. There was some grace involved with things that happened when they needed to happen. So, I was lucky with that. Antipsychotics worked. Like 70% of people with schizophrenia, antipsychotics do not work. I was lucky for that. I was lucky for that I had insurance to cover psychiatric care, that I wasn't thrown into the system of the uninsured. There were a lot of, in ways I'm very lucky, and I'm sorry to hear about your brother, because that must have been incredibly painful and difficult.
Well, I don't want to take up people's time. He did express himself through photography. He did a lot of abstract photography. And I hope to at least make a little Shutterfly book of his work, because I think he could visually really show what he was thinking. And he did a lot of abstract thinking. He read all of Shakespeare beginning to end. But he was so tortured. He was sort of the town drunk for 10 years. And he had done a ton of mountain climbing with my father when he was very young. And he ended up in Utah. And the last 5 years were just euphoric for him. It was just the top of his life for him.
That's good.
It was just unfortunate past.
Anyone else? Hannah?
I just wanted to say that for me, I think we're all wordsmiths, and we know the importance of language. And something that I've had to correct in myself is like, you know, I have dyslexia, I'm not dyslexic. Like, well, I'll use the schizophrenia one since we're using that. A person that schizophrenia isn't the whole person, it's something that you have. And I think to me, it's important to differentiate that. It's like I have AD, that's not all of me. That's a piece of me that I have. It doesn't define who I am. It's just a part of what I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I hear, I don't consider myself a schizophrenic because that categorizes me based on a very broad
thing.
term that doesn't really mean much at all. It
Yeah. And it's
because
one thing.
yeah, it's one thing, and I don't feel like my life is really affected by schizophrenia at all anymore.
Mhm. That's really wonderful.
Sarah, could you talk briefly about how your illness affected your relationship with your friends? And I ask this question because Nan and I back in Florida had a good friend who had a bipolar disorder. And he very often would go off of his meds and would become manic. And it was very disturbing. But made all the more so because he was a psychologist. And if anyone understood exactly what was going on with him, it was him. How did your illness affect your relationship with your friends?
I'll say that I only lost one friend over this whole time period. Um, and I think that I wasn't completely myself in my 20s. So I did have close friends. Like I've always had the ability to have quality long-term friendships. And so there were people that stuck by me matter what and just accepted there was a part of me that was a little off. I was still there emotionally for my friends to support them and be a good friend. I was always a good friend, even if my career wasn't going anywhere and I was frustrated with things. I was still a good friend, and only only lost one friend through all of this. And I will say that now this situation works well for me. My inner circle are the people that I have told my diagnosis to, because I write about this in revealing your diagnosis, but um, it's an honor for someone to disclose their diagnosis to you. It means like there's a new stage of friendship, and to me, the gold seal of approval that someone is my friend if I am a schizophrenia and they're fine with it, and then I feel like I can tell them anything, and I'm free.
That's terrific. Any other questions for Sarah? Anybody?
Did Sandra have a question?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, Sarah, thank you
I'm
so
sorry,
very
I was
much.
muted.
Oh, go ahead.
I had my hand up and I was muted, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sandra.
One, I just want to say to Sarah, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. It meant a whole lot to me
Oh, thank you.
because I grew up at a time where we weren't supposed to have mental issues. And so nobody talked about how you felt about being isolated during the pandemic and those kinds of things most recently. So I don't think I've had mental illness, but I realized that because I lived in a world that didn't talk about it, I probably had a couple of issues based on the way our society was. That when I was growing up as a kid in the 50s and 60s in New Jersey, people didn't talk about abusive relationships, just ignored it. But there were so many things that I can go back and look at and say they were there, but our society ignored them. And then in my mind, I lived in Massachusetts up until about 20 years, not quite 20 years ago. And Mike Dukakis was one of the first people to cut funding for mental health. and shutting down the institutions that could help people. And then that trend seems to have passed across this country in a lot of different ways, where we somehow feel that we don't want to help mental health. And then I'm looking at a bigger picture that says the gun violence that's out there, where people would walk into schools and kill children, says maybe it's too easy to say that's mental health. But do you feel, your story is very positive, that there is help out there? Do you feel that enough is being done for the bigger picture of mental health?
Well, I think there's a lot of problems. I think that when it comes to mentally ill people, there's not enough psychiatric beds. Like so many mentally ill patients are being held in prison for no reason. They haven't committed a crime. There's just nowhere else for them. And so there needs to be an allocation of funding to fund mental health and the care of people in crisis. As far as gun violence, I'm not an expert, but my personal opinion is it's a cultural phenomenon. It's a social disease. I hesitate to say that, oh, each person who shot up a school, they probably had a serious mental illness. I don't know about that, honestly. I hesitate to make that connection because an overwhelming amount of people who are mentally ill are not violent. So I think that we're moving forward at too slow a pace. But I think we are getting there. Just like, back around 1900, cancer was considered an evil affliction, like you were on the wrong side of God if you had cancer, and obviously that has changed. But I think it's going to be the same way with mental health, but it's just mental illness, but it's just going to take time.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone else? Okay, Sarah, thank you so very much for talking so freely with us. Really appreciate it. And you're obviously touching a lot of people. So I'm really glad that you could join us, and thank you so very much for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about some good news. Does anyone have anything to share? I know Nan does, so I'm going to start with her.
Hi there. As you know, I've been kind of shifting out of clinical practice and into other things, but still trying to stay in healthcare in some way. So I have an interview next week with a group that does board review courses for nurse practitioners and continuing education. I have to do a 30-minute presentation for them to say that, yes, I can speak. So we'll see how that goes. And today I got picked up by Writer's Digest to be part of their big book review that they do every year, where people pay to have their self-published books reviewed and be given advice about what worked and what didn't work. And since I love to read and have time to do that now, I'm excited. I've asked for 50 books. So since I read about a book a day. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And I'm also starting to work on my own novel that's been sitting aside for quite a while, and on my memoir that's been sitting aside for quite a while. So.
Did you submit a story for the anthology?
Oh, yes, and I have an anthology story that I've just got to look at one more time, and then I'll be submitting that to TAF, and that'll be my first short story.
Cool, that's fantastic, man.
Anyone else have some good news to share? Drew?
Drew, you're on mute.
Just want to let you know that the 7th annual Carolina Book and Writers Conference is coming along. We have our first speaker set up, and he's going to talk about artificial intelligence. And I don't know what he's going to talk about now, because by October, when we have this session, everything could change. But the conference will be free this year. So as I get more information, I'll be putting it out there, but you can register now. and there's no cost to attend. It's 3 days.
Are you still at the McKimmon Center, Drew?
No, this is going to be virtual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're doing it virtually, so because we have people right now, we have people from a lot of different states that are going to be participating. So
That's terrific. Speaking of AI, Allison Hill did some deep research on the subject for a piece she wrote for Writer's Digest. And I've got her scheduled for the August meeting to talk about AI. So that's going to be very interesting.
great.
I'm looking forward to that. Does anyone else have anything to share? Any good news?
I was just going to mention that Chat GTP and all those other AI programs are basically wholesale plagiarism, because they go out, they scrape the web for
Mhm.
stuff that's already been created and form something new out of it, and the creator gets nothing. So Allison's pretty upset about it, and I don't blame her.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything?
Could
Oh,
you,
Michaela?
Yep, Michaela.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just
Michaela,
want to say, on top of my new job as a court monitor, I also have a bunch of freelance work in the mix, which is exciting. I have an article coming out from my local paper, the Bethel Grapevine. I have 3 articles coming up for Bike Rumor, where
Wow.
I'll be testing different products, hip packs, bike pumps, and multi-tools, and I get to keep all the products too. which is
Cool.
a nice perk because some of that stuff is very expensive. And then I also just heard from Encyclopedia Britannica, and I am going to be completing a test assignment on Bertha Pappenheim, which will be due in 2 weeks from now. So I'm really excited about that.
why did you select her as your test article?
Actually, Marcia is the one who suggested the topic.
Oh, really?
Because she knew about my background in public health, and so she thought that it would be a good fit for me. So I'm excited.
Excellent. Well, congrats on all of that. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joel?
Oh, Joe. Okay.
could you repeat the name of
There
his
we go.
conference?
All right,
I'm sorry.
I had
Oh.
myself muted. No good news, particularly. I've been writing some reviews for some of the theaters. I just wanted to comment to Michaela in my research for my ongoing, ever expanding book on antebellum society called Our War with Paraguay and How to Sit in the Whip Skirt. The court recordings, nobody did literal word by word recording until the 1850s, and people started taking courses in what's called phonography. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there'd be these advertisements: learn phonography and get ahead. And it's a early form of shorthand, but that's when trials really started getting word for word rather than just some guy's summary. There's your
Drew?
useful fact for the day.
Drew, I think I heard someone ask for the name of your conference again.
Okay, the conference is the Carolina Book and Writer Conference.
And it's in October.
It's in October. I think it's the 6th, 7th, and 8th.
When you get closer, will you share some information with the group?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're just getting some of our speakers together, so I don't want to really go out there real early. So
Yeah,
but
that's
hold the
cool.
date if you're interested.
Cool. Anyone else have anything to share?
I posted it to the group email earlier, but my new book came out last Tuesday, and there's a release party at page 158 Books in Wake Forest on Sunday at 2. So come one, come all, come have some fun and join us for the book release party. It's called Ice.
Congratulations on that book, Lee.
Thank you. It's
It's
the
a
5th
mystery,
in the
correct?
series.
Anyone else? Okay, guys, this was a terrific meeting, a really wonderful meeting. I'll thank all of you for joining us this evening. And again, our thanks to Sarah Ryan for talking about her personal story so forthrightly. Really appreciate it. I wanted to let you know that we've got some activities planned for the next few months. I'll be sending out some notices about those. The one thing I'm most especially excited about, though, is it looks like historian Nathaniel Philbrook, who is one of my absolute favorite nonfiction writers, has agreed to join us for a TAF talk later this year in the fall. I'm going to be reaching out to him in September to arrange something either around in November or December. He's promoting his new book, Travels with Washington, right now, so he's unavailable in the summer. But he did get back to us, and he's excited about this, and so am I. So I'm going to be fanning out big time for that one. But I'll be sending out a lot of notices. Looking at an event with Donna Gephardt. You all remember Donna. Looking at Denise Gibbons is going to be doing a presentation on legalities for writers. So we've got a lot of really eclectic stuff coming up throughout the rest of the year. So I'll be sending stuff on that. So I want to thank all of you for this evening. I hope you all have a great evening. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next month. Y'all have a good one.